Hey everybody, I'm back. It's Erin from the Impatient Gardener, and it is great to see you again. Here we are sitting at the end of 2019, and I thought there's no better time than to look back at the year in your garden than at the end of the year when we're all reminiscing about what went right and wrong this year. And gosh knows when you're gardening, there's a lot that goes right and wrong. So I thought we'd just do a quick year in review and just kind of walk back through and take a look at what happened here over this year. So last January was tough around here. We had the polar vortex, we had a ton of snow, but we did one really big DIY project, and I wrote about it on the blog, which was that we created the arbor for the vegetable garden. We assembled the whole thing in the basement and then moved it outside because it was freezing out. And it turned out great. I was so happy with how it turned out. Of course, I was envisioning that there would be flowers growing out already this year. That did not happen. So the arbor was a win. The climbing roses that I planted to grow up it were not so much a win. I had a bit of a drainage problem there, so we'll have to fix that for this coming year. In any case, it was fun to be working on that vegetable garden, which was a big project all in 2018. Then it was February, and February is all about seeds because by February I am chomping at the bit to get out there and get gardening, but of course I can't. So I did a whole blog post on how I select the seeds I'm going to grow, how I go through all the seeds I have because I have way too many. And then I did a video on all the gear that I use to set up and grow and start things inside. Now, I start a lot of things inside. I've gotten a little bit extreme on it, but everything I do can be scaled down to just 1 or 2 trays of seeds. And I would recommend to you that you really think about it. If you don't start anything inside, think about doing it this year. Because it's a great way to get those garden juices flowing again. Just don't start them too early because you really run into a problem if you start your seeds too early and you have nowhere to put them because you can't put them outside yet. Then in March, I did a whole blog post on how to grow sweet peas, which are probably the flower that got me growing flowers from seed. It's very hard to find sweet peas to buy as plants, and they often don't transplant well, so it's usually best to start them yourself. And they are the most amazing, lovely flower. And it was highly successful. I got great big bunches of flowers and they bloomed so long into the year. It was just mostly the weather rather than me, I think. But it was a good year for sweet peas, and it all started in March when I sowed those seeds. I also did a video on how to prune hydrangeas. This video ended up being a little bit controversial because even though I said it in the video and in the description, this was all about pruning hydrangeas that bloom on new wood, like hydrangea paniculata, which is like limelight type hydrangeas, or hydrangea arborescens, which is things like Annabelle and Incredible, things like that. I don't blame people for getting confused. Hydrangeas are confusing. They all sound the same. A lot of people don't know. They'll look a little bit alike. So it's difficult to know what kind of hydrangea you have, and definitely how you prune a hydrangea depends a lot on the type. So you can be rough and you can prune hydrangea paniculata more than you might think if you need to. And certainly with arborescens, you can chop those suckers all the way down to the ground, which is essentially what I do. I leave a little bit of a framework, but well, whatever, watch the video. But a lot of people thought I had absolutely killed those hydrangeas. So, well, wait for it. We'll get to that later. Okay, and then it was April, and April is sort of the start of dahlia season because that's when I plant all my dahlias in pots early. So I did a whole video on how to get your dahlias going early, which is a really good thing to do if you garden like I do in a place where it's a little cooler. It gets everything a little bit of a head start, and I think it's much easier to plant them because you won't lose track of them in your garden if there's an actual plant there when you plant the tubers. Then on the blog, I did a post about how to grow clematis. If I have a very first plant love, for me it's clematis. I write a lot about and talk a lot about dahlias, but for me, it all started with clematis. I have probably 30 of them in my garden. I tried to keep track this year and I was not successful because I ran out of time to do that, but somewhere there's a half-done spreadsheet. But it's all about growing them and all the different ways that I grow them and all the different types of clematis that you can grow in your garden. And I will get more this year, of course, because why wouldn't you have more? I'll figure out where to put them later. We always find a place to put a plant. And then on social media and a little bit on the blog, I did a whole thing where I asked people to weigh in on what color they thought I should paint the new garden gate for the vegetable garden. Oh, that was fun. People had so many very firm ideas. I ended up painting it, actually staining it, a color called salamander. Really dark, dark, dark green, kind of looks a little gray, looks a little teal in some colors. It's fun, I like it. Turned out great as far as I'm concerned. And then in May, I did this really fun video that was just gonna kind of be like a little vlog of doing some working in the garden, and it turned out really neat. I needed to make a path for the new vegetable garden entrance, and I didn't want to have to go buy any materials. I just wanted to use what I had on hand. Well, I did have some blue stone left from a path that I had pulled up at my grandma's house many, many, many years earlier and had used in different places around our property already, but I had a few pieces left. And I just laid those out and they came together so well. There's a nice little curve that was, I believe, the exact same pieces that created one of the curves in the original path at my grandma's house. And I love that little path, and it turned out so great. And it was really fun to make a video in which it just worked, because a lot of times you try to do something and it doesn't quite work the way you expect it, which is kind of how gardening goes, right? Then in May, I also did a video on how to plant dinner plate dahlias, because at the end of May, it was time to get them alongside the house, which is where I plant all those really big ones. So I showed how I stake them, how I plant them, and then how I do the Florida weave to keep them upright. And then all of a sudden it was June, and like June it's go time. There is no muddling about in the garden. Like, you have got to get it done. So we started off June. I did a video on how I put together the window box. Always my favorite container to plant up regardless of the season. And always a little bit of a challenge. You're gonna view it from two sides. There's not a lot of room in it. And it's a big focal point on my house, at least, so I really try to get that one right. I also did a video on putting the stock tank pond in the middle of the vegetable garden, which was fun to me because I had no idea what I was doing. Like, literally, I laughed my way through half of that video because crazy things were happening that I was just doing wrong. But I had no idea what I was doing, so it was a very fun project for me because I don't often go into a project knowing so little. I did do a little research on container ponds before I started that, but it's certainly my first time doing it, and it was kind of fun to be a newbie at doing something like that. And I got some great tips from all of you in the comments from that video too. And then also in June, I updated a portion of the garden right off the patio, and I walked you through the process of what plants I was putting in there and sort of how I was laying them all out. And it was kind of a light bulb moment for me. It's probably the first time I've had a design that I've been working on translate so well from paper to the garden. So that was pretty exciting for me. All right, then we were in July, and like, this is now the height of summer, right? So I'm really busy in July. I head out of town for a little bit usually. So there was just a lot going on because that's how July is, right, for everyone. So I did a container tour. So instead of planting up a lot of containers in videos this year, I just sort of planted them all and then showed you what was in them afterwards. Which was kind of a different way to approach it. Maybe you want to weigh in and let me know if you like that or if you'd rather see me actually planting them up. I don't know if you're kind of sick of that whole thing or not, so let me know what you think about that. Then I also did a tour of the vegetable garden, which by this point was in full swing. This is a big deal because it's the first full year I've been in that vegetable garden, which is a space that I have dreamed about for many, many, many years. And it's so wonderful to see it come to fruition and see it be what I always knew it could be. Okay, then it was August already. And I learned this year that I think that August is the best month of the year in my garden. And partly because I grow so many dahlias, and dahlias are really coming into their own by August. So there's definitely some blooming before them, but the big show is probably in August. So there was a lot going on in the garden that you saw and a lot going on in the garden that you didn't see. And what you didn't see was that I did a tour for master gardeners in my garden in August. And that had me really busy because I was running around trying to make everything look really nice. And so there wasn't as much time for some of the videos that I wish I would have done, including an August garden tour, which would have been fabulous. So I will definitely try to make that happen this year in August, but put it in my calendar that lives in my head right now. Also in August, I did an update on that hydrangea pruning video, just showing people how the hydrangeas that I had pruned in that video turned out. I think a lot of people were surprised. Because again, like I said, I really do think people are a little confused about hydrangeas, and I don't blame them because it is a little confusing. But I just want to show everyone, like, you will not kill your hydrangea if you prune it like this, if it's one of these kinds of hydrangeas. So that was the update that I did on that. I also did a dahlia tour video because, of course, dahlias are at the height of their season at that point. So I couldn't miss that opportunity, even if it was a little bright that day, if I recall. I also did an update on the new patio garden area, which had really grown in well, far better than I expected it to look in that first year after just being in the ground a couple of months. Couldn't have been happier with how that area turned out. And then over on the blog, I had a couple of posts, one of which was, I think, the coolest thing I did all last year, which was floating flowers. So I had been to Chanticleer in June, and all around Chanticleer, beautiful public garden that I think everyone should get to if you have the opportunity. They have these pots that are full of water, and they just float flowers in them and make basically one-day floral arrangements in them. So in order to fill in a spot for this garden tour, I ran to a garden center, found a really pretty pot on clearance, bought that pot, filled it up with water, and started decorating it with flowers. And this became something I did all the time. I so enjoyed doing it. It was such a nice sort of Zen-like way to appreciate time in the garden. And I just fell in love with doing that. So I'm definitely going to do that next year. It's just such a lovely little moment. And so something that I had thought was going to be sort of a temporary solution for that garden tour is something I'm absolutely going to keep in my garden. Who knows, maybe I'll do more of it in other places too, but it was so much fun. I also did a blog post on all the annuals I had growing around, most of which I had grown from seed because they were really looking great at that point in the garden. I had so much color in the garden, none of which would be possible if I didn't start a lot of those flowers from seed, because there's no way I would have enough money to go out and buy all those annuals. And plus, you can't necessarily find all those things in a pot pre-grown if you've run to the store. So there's so much value in finding interesting flowers and starting them from seeds yourself. Then September, which is one of my favorite months of the year. It's so great. I did a garden tour then. It was the garden tour I should have done in August but didn't have time for. So, and that was nice, but I wish I would have done it in August. I also did a video where I shared with you my favorite garden tools. I love gadgets. I love tools. And so it was fun to share with you the things that I've found over the years that are my favorites, but what was even more fun was all the comments. So make sure if you go back and watch that video that you read the comments, because so many people left suggestions for tools that are great, that they love, that I should check out. And there's so many great ones in there. I'm still going through the list. Really great ideas in there. And then on the blog in September, I shared my onion harvest, which was exciting for a couple of reasons. One, because I grew so many. Two, because I grew those onions in a way I have never grown onions before. First of all, I started them all from seed on January 31st. So that was 9 months of tending plants before I harvested them. And then I grew them in clumps, completely different from how I've ever grown onions before. This was sort of a mass planting situation. And what was great was that I was able to use them as green onions during the year, and then I let them develop. Now, I didn't get huge onions from them, which was okay. I don't necessarily need a 2-pound onion. What I got was a ton of onions, and we are still eating those onions now. So they are going to take us at least halfway through winter. So that was fun because I tried something new, and it was a really great harvest from the vegetable garden, which, as I've already mentioned, was kind of a big deal last year. Okay, so if September is summer, October is definitely fall. So the videos really were fall oriented at that point. I did a video on 5 different ways to plant bulbs, which I hope some of you found helpful. And then I did 2 videos on how to store dahlia tubers, because they were sort of 2 parts, one of which sort of happens earlier and one of which happens a little later. And I hope a lot of you found those helpful as well. And I hope you all had success with that method. Then in November, I did 2 video collaborations separately with YouTubers who were super fun to work with. It's really fun to collaborate with people. So the first one was some fall garden tips with Eric from Garden Fork. Eric's a good buddy, and I'm on his podcast sometimes, and we have a fun time chatting. And I think a lot of people found some really good tips in those videos. And then with Alexandra from the Middle-Sized Garden, we talked about some do's and don'ts for the winter garden, depending on where you live, because what's really cool is that Alexandra lives in England. I obviously live not in England. I live in Wisconsin. Anyways, we grow a lot of the same plants, but in much different climates. So it was an interesting way to get a feel for what you should or should not be doing in your garden depending on the climate you live in. And I think a lot of those tips, if you're somewhere in between, you can kind of push one way or the other on when to do them. And I think a lot of people found that helpful too. And then suddenly we were on to December. I don't know how that happened, but it was the end of the year all of a sudden, and I did 2 container videos, one of which was just how I put together my winter containers, and then the other one was sort of some behind the scenes tips and tricks about actually putting these structures together on some more complicated containers. The great thing about that video was that I also showed a couple of containers I did that were super simple, like I stuck the top of a pine tree in a pot with some branches, and some people loved those even more. Some people loved those just as much as the really elaborate containers that I did. And I think that's the beautiful thing about garden, is that we all love different things. It doesn't have to be super complicated. Sometimes simple is great. So that was 2019 in a bit of a nutshell. I can't believe it went by so fast again. That seems to keep happening. I just want to say thank you to all of you who came along on my gardening journey with me this year. So many of you are new to the channel this year, and thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, supporting. I so appreciate it, and I love hearing from you and what's happening in your gardens. And the great news is that here we are on the cusp of a new year. We have a whole new year in the garden to do whatever we want to do in there, make any mistakes we might end up making, maybe have a few successes, but most of all, the opportunity to do what we want to do in our own gardens. And to me, that's the most important thing. Your garden is your garden. You don't have to justify what you do in your garden to anyone else in the world. It just has to please you. And honestly, there are very few places that we have on this planet where we don't have to please anybody else. We only have to please ourselves. So I would say please yourself in your garden in 2020. Wait, did that sound bad? It might have. How about this? Do what you want to do in your garden in 2020. Maybe that's a little better. Anyways, I will be doing what I want to do in my garden in 2020, and I hope you guys come along for the ride because I got some fun stuff planned. What should we do in the garden this year? Anything but sit inside. Okay. I did a video on how to plant that also